Welcome to the first episode of the Compass to Careers podcast with myself, Rees Thomas, the founder of the Engineering Compass. Along with me, I've got two of the ambassadors from the group, Josh and Khaled. So, Khaled, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what your country is, and what you're studying.
Right. So, hi everyone. I'm Khaled Saib. I study chemical engineering. I'm in my final year. I'm in Swansea, and I am from Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. So, yeah.
Josh?
Hi everyone, my name's Josh and I am an apprentice in an automation company called VA Technology, and I currently study a level 3 apprenticeship in advanced manufacturing and level 4 HNC in mechanical engineering.
Perfect. So to link us all together, we're all either aspiring engineers or current engineers. I've been in the engineering industry about 7 years now as an electrical engineer. Khaled is an aspiring chemical engineer, and Josh is a aspiring, is it mechatronics, Josh?
Mechatronics, yeah. Automation, control systems.
So this podcast is going to be used to sort of highlight the sort of problems, issues, barriers to entry, and then all the things that each of us have done to sort of boost ourselves up and get to the point we've got to. So today's episode, we're going to look at tackling essentially breaking into the industry as a student and what problems each of us have faced, along with a little bit at the end about internships. So I'll sort of take the first sort of steps in terms of saying that. So as a student, I was never the most, we'll say, actively gifted. I can't sit down, work for a week and then I know everything. It's not how it works. And in engineering, a lot of people can do that. So you're sort of working with a competition of a lot of the academics, whereas for me, I was quite a hands-on person. So initially, when I finished my degree, finished my GCSEs, went to my A-levels, failed my A-levels, and then I went to college. So after college, I looked at degrees and decided that it wasn't going to be for me. Up until the point I applied for a degree apprenticeship and actually, through a lot of hard work, ended up getting it. And for me, a lot of lessons were learned in that process, and there wasn't really much guidance or help in that process. So that's why I've created the Engineering Compass to essentially help everybody many people that can help, really. So for me, the sort of breaking into the industry was a lot of sending out CVs to different companies and then finally getting accepted to Raytheon, which is an aerospace company based, all over the world, predominantly America. So I'll let Khaled take over now and talk about he's just finished his internship with Severn Trent, so we'll talk a little bit about, but as a student, what are the steps he's taken to essentially get to that point?
Yeah. So, I think a different sort of backstory to how Rees was back when he was in uni. I was a sort of kind that similar to Rees as well, not really too like the brightest in academics. I found it a bit more difficult to get the highest of the grades and, sit down and revise for constantly most of the time. However, I managed to sort of finish my second year and land an internship as a design engineer at Severn Trent. And whilst doing that, there was a lot of things I took away. I was there for three months, so around about 12 weeks. And all I could say is to sort of any future engineering student or any like up and coming engineering student, please, please, please consider going in for internships right after you're done with your first year or even second year. Because not only does it help you to build relationships when you want to come back potentially after third year, but also just in general, talk about how you as an individual can utilize the skills that you've got from university into practicality. I think that for me sort of really helps.
The one thing I will say is that for you particularly, a lot of people that I've spoken to now have said that they were finding it hard to get internships.
Yeah.
Which I think personally becomes out as a poor excuse because you are actually a foreign student. So you finding work is significantly harder because you need to find somebody that will be willing to sponsor you in the long term. So those certain situations don't come around very often. So if you can do it, then I think anyone can do it.
Absolutely. I think as well, like, as you mentioned as well, being an international student obviously is a bit more difficult. And I could just like, by speaking to some of my colleagues, my friends, I could just tell there's a lot of potential that people don't really realize within themselves. And it's just sometimes it's a matter of just going into a company that has belief in potential. And yes, it is difficult. You know, when working with Rees, running back to, I think, when was it? Roundabouts January time, Rees?
Yeah, so Khaled came to me with, I'd say, a pretty polished CV. You'd obviously done your research, done all your work, hadn't you? And so we did a couple of little tweaks to that. And then the big thing is that for someone who's never done an interview, it can be quite a daunting sort of situation. Because as we worked out pretty quickly with Khaled, he's got the world of stuff to say, but it's sort of getting the points across in the sort of a lot of time period that you've got. Because in those interviews, it can be quite intimidating. And when you've really got maybe half an hour, max an hour to sort of get your point across, explain why you want to be the candidate they pick, and why they should remember you, making sure the key points are listed and the questions are answered correctly is something we worked out. So essentially, we probably spent maybe 2 weeks, I think, probably something like that, going through the different scenarios, going through different questions, and then finally, I think probably the night before, we sat down, did a mock interview, and we polished up your answers. And I'd say, there was a couple of little things that you didn't even know you could do, like take a notepad and pen in. And for you, that was a game changer. You could write all these questions down.
It was. I think, like, honestly, for anyone, and I'm going back to asking my assessor and the recruiters, bringing in a notepad and a pen makes you the outstanding candidate out of a lot. Because funny enough, I was the only one holding that. I remember Reese mentioning it to me. He was like, "Listen, mate, not gonna hurt. You're not cheating or anything. It's an interview for a reason." And also being prepared with questions to ask. That alone makes you stand out because you actually care. You're actually interested within the company and the job that you're applying for. So absolutely, I think that's something every candidate that wants to do when they're in that interview stage. Big tip, generally, get a pen and paper, get a pen and notepad with you, and also dress smart because I was already prepared the week before it. And little did I know, a quick trip to Primark didn't hurt me.
Oh yeah, that was my go-to advice. That like you don't need to buy expensive suit pants. I still use my £11 Primark ones, and they've lasted me a few years now. They might be falling apart a little bit. I think one of the buckles come off, but for £11, you can't really complain. But one thing I will say is, so Josh, obviously you took a slightly different route to Khaled. You were a bit more along the same route as me. How did you essentially make that sort of pivot? What was the choice of an apprenticeship over redoing a degree? Because obviously you didn't start in engineering, but I'll let you explain a little bit about the apprenticeship you do.
Yeah, so I originally went to university and did a completely different degree, effectively in something called music industries, which you could say it's in a very creative field, but my degree was more around promotion, management, project planning, networking, social media, that kind of stuff. But again, pretty much not relevant to engineering at all. Effectively what came about from it is that I always had a bit of a interesting time at school of being both creative and having enjoyment in logical and technical stuff. But as a kid, I didn't really find a way to merge them correctly. And I was very much encouraged to follow engineering, but at the time it wasn't ringing as much as what music was to me at the time. So I went down that path. Over time, I did realize it wasn't really for me, and I found that I was lacking that technical and logical stimulation part in my brain, and it wasn't making me happy. So over the time, I then started to reinvest into engineering, look back at my time working with Lego and stuff, and I eventually begin thinking robots are really cool. And slowly following from that, I found automation engineering after a while, and that was really what called out to me. So once I kind of figured out what field of engineering I wanted to go into because of that, from that point, the very first thing that I decided was that, well, going back to uni just isn't an option for me. I need an income.
Yeah.
And so from that, an apprenticeship was the way forward for me. It was my only real choice that I had. So next problem was the competition. I originally tried to go for a degree apprenticeship, but obviously degree apprenticeships do require A levels in relevant fields. I didn't have them. My A levels were in completely different fields, so I had no chance there. So I had to then instead go through level 3 apprenticeships, which meant really, going back to basics, effectively for my age anyway. So I purchased some online courses, and after my work through the day, I just sat and I watched these online courses. I made notes in my pad. I got these 2 little exercise books and I just wrote down everything I could. I downloaded the free software, which the courses recommended that I did. And yeah, over time, I did eventually come across a night school, which was just 7 weeks of just working with some robots. I think they were Kukan robots, just small, little articulated ones. And that gave me some time actually with some hands-on experience as well. So obviously I whacked that in the CV as soon as I could to say that I had got experience actually programming robots with both the programming software and the teach pendant itself. And obviously in engineering, experience on anything is better than like not. So I looked into that, and my application processes were rigorous. It took a lot of CV reworks. I had to pull out every single stop I could to show that I was interested in engineering. Literally, I included in my CV that I used to play with Lego a lot, and that's not a joke. Because I had such limited actual career-based stuff, I really I looked at every single aspect of my life and what I did, and anything technical, anything electrical, anything software, I pulled it out and said, "Yep, I've got this." And whacked it in there. Thankfully, over time, I did really develop some interview skills, and I had some valuable people who helped me with a lot of advice. And similar to what you guys have said, funnily enough, in the interview that landed me my apprenticeship, I turned up in a suit. I didn't turn up with a notepad and pen, but instead I did turn up with an entire folder full of the notes that I had made to prove that I was teaching myself about engineering. And I had done research on the company itself and as well the fields that they specialize in. So VA specialize in investment casting. I looked into as much as I could about investment casting, manufacturing, as well as the company itself. And it was the first question I got asked when I sat down. They said, "What do you know about us?" Straight off the bat. And obviously that was that is something you will obviously get asked in pretty much every interview that you go to, because they want to know how much you want to work for them, not that you just want a job.
Yeah. So that is one thing that I would always say. Sorry to cut you off there, Josh. I was going to say the one thing that a lot of people do now is they do this habit of pinging out the same CV to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
The one thing that your CV should always be is tailored to the job application you're going for.
Absolutely.
You've got to make sure the skills, as Josh has said, even if you don't have the skills, there's very many ways that you can essentially get some sort of skills that match what the job is looking for. Because the amount of recruiters I've spoken to now, in a sea of people where everyone has the same sort of grades, whether that's A levels, BTECs, other call it college, well, course, I don't know what they are now, and then a degree. How do you differentiate yourself? Because they want someone who is keen, who wants to develop, and is willing to put that work in. And that's what you've done there, Josh. You've shown that even though you don't have the background that some of the other candidates might do, you've got all that knowledge now that you're taking your time to do and, putting that work in. And don't get me wrong, I think you've gone way above and beyond what most people would need to do to sort of achieve half of what you've done.
Yeah, I think honestly a great way to summarize it for people who look to get into apprenticeships. I'm unsure how it would be for graduates, but for myself, if I had to give advice about it, I would say go in to show them that you are going to achieve a career in engineering with or without their help. Don't go to them with the attitude of "I need you to give me this." Paint it more of the image of "I am going for this," and you could be the ones to.
Yeah, exactly. You're selling yourself on.
When I'm there, I will contribute to your company, rather than please, oh please, teach me.
I think as well, just to add on to what Josh has mentioned, even from a graduate perspective, or sort of like if you're going through the career perspective, I myself, when going back to the January period when I was applying, I myself, realized that everyone was just, fast applying everything. And thing is, like, obviously speaking to Rees and other recruiters, I've realized that as a candidate, all you have to do is just spend a bit more time to fine tune, associate to the real world, like the job description specifically. If there's any keywords from that, use that in the CV. They love to see that,
Yeah.
and even from a grad's perspective, slightly different to what Josh is saying, but also being mindful enough that you are trying to sell yourself. Yes, you've got the degree, but also you think about it as a loaf of bread. You are now prepared. You've been ready, everything, but you're now going into the industry and actually, you know, facing it step in. There will be times where you will have things you've never even learned within your uni lecture rooms, and you just have to show them that you're prepared, eager. And another big thing, I think me and Reese also mentioned it quite a lot, is compassion. You have to show a lot of compassion to whatever you're doing, regardless of, yes, you're just a grad. Yes, you're just someone brand new into the industry, but also just showing that I'm willing to do that extra little step. I'm willing to, learn a bit more about this specific process or this specific thing. And it's just showing them all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still waiting to hear how it's like a loaf of bread. What- Why is it like a loaf of bread?
It's more, I think the reason why I say that is because university prepares you with the base and the foundation, so.
It's like a sandwich, then, not like a loaf of bread. Is that what you're looking for? Is that the word you're looking for? I mean, hey, like, next time I speak to someone, I'm going to say engineer is like a loaf of bread, and then I'm going to keep talking, and I have no idea why it's like a loaf of bread. But
That could be the title of this episode. Engineering is like a loaf of bread.
it will be that will be the title now. And so the thing that I was going to say was, so in terms of like key takeaways from what we've spoken about so far,
Yeah.
I'd say to both of you, the question I'm going to pose is, what was the biggest sort of barrier for you individually breaking into the industry? Josh, if you got it on the tip of your tongue, I'll let one of you go first.
Okay. The biggest barrier for me was obviously I had to really convince people that this was my new passion. It doesn't look good when you're going from a different career, and obviously we're good. We plan to talk about this in a later episode.
Yeah.
But that was personally my biggest challenge. I had to really convince people who I was in applications with that I meant it, that I really wanted this, and I wasn't just grasping at straws to try and land myself a secure job. It was more than that.
Yeah.
And so I think personally, the thing that made me overcome that was just a lot of the self-study that I went through. It was just the way that I delivered my eagerness through it. I really tried to convey in everything that I did and said how serious it was. Actions speak louder than words. I rocked up to the interview with my notes. I couldn't have just done them in preparation for the interview. It was proof that I was teaching myself, proof that I was trying. And I think that's what personally made a significant difference. I was never lucky enough to get feedback from applications and process which I wasn't exactly for.
Yeah.
So I'm going off my own guesses here.
Khaled, what was your biggest barrier? Aside from obviously the international student card.
I think it was, I think when it comes to the biggest problem I faced within entering industry was the navigating, the requirements of what I could deliver. Um, mindful enough that coming from a background of chemical engineering, it's always the question of what do you actually really do? And, I think the problem I face is making sure that these applications I give out are tailored to the specific role, to the specific industry, to the specific, like awareness of like everything to do with the role. Because obviously when you're like, even like preparing for interviews, I think we mentioned this very briefly together, myself and you, Reese. I think, I didn't know anything about the STAR method until we used to keep all these things, because funnily enough, the STAR method is very widely known, but university doesn't really teach you that. And I think, as much as, yes, you may have some people here and there teaching you it, or could teach it to you in a different method, but ideally it's a matter of, how to really like tailor every interview or every CV, to compete in a strategic way. Because at the end of the day, it's a game of selling yourself, and it's a matter of how you can sell your best.
Mhm.
Whether it's a group task, I remember when I first was talking to you about this in the group task. It was, oh, am I there to show off what I can do and I can actually do the task?
Yeah.
And funnily enough, it's not. It's a matter of how you work. It's the soft skills that you have and the hard skills that you bring as well. And I think for a lot of engineering students that don't really have that exposure, you know, um, like myself, not so long ago, uh, it's sort of a bit difficult because you're there like, well, I'm just used to learning and going
Yeah.
to the line.
You have to sort of take it by the horns. It's a bit of a different sort of layout in terms of how you tackle those sort of situations. Obviously, that's the whole point of Engineering Compass. That's why it was started, is to give people this information for free whenever they need it. And having worked with both of you now, I think you both definitely have more than enough skills to get into the industry. And I would say that was my biggest barrier, is actually trusting that I could do the job that I was trying to go for. And obviously in a sea of candidates where I'd say most people had better grades than I did, it was almost getting over that stigma of, realistically, the grades matter in terms of the first check of the CV. They look over and see they meet the requirements. But in that interview, I'd say that's where I thrive, is because I can answer the questions, but I can also, as I did with you, Khaled, in that interview prep sessions, it's not just about answering the questions, it's about making your answers memorable to the point where you link the answer to a personal story of yours. And that means that you can not only answer their questions to the best of your ability, but it means that when they talk to someone or they ask a person the same question, your answers will stick out in their mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think building that confidence, as you say, especially for you, Josh, when you're changing industries, you've got to sort of make that leap, and you've got to be comfortable making the steps that you're going to have to go above and beyond. And the problem is, a lot of people think just because they studied engineering and they've got that degree that the world owes them something, or because there is now, as we say, a shortage of engineers, that companies are going to just take on every Tom, Dick and Harry because they have a degree. It's not. We'll go into another episode. I think there's plenty to talk about in terms of the industry as a whole, and where it's going, what is needed, because the opportunities are going to be massive. It's just you have to be willing to put the work in to take them.
Absolutely, yeah. It's I think that's something which we should definitely talk about this in a later episode.
Yeah.
But topics about like the fact that there is a stigma that companies will just accept anyone because there's an admin for engineers. Like they are not just after that, because there's a lot of engineering graduates still coming out into the industry still, and it's about being the engineer who really wants to be one.
Yeah, exactly. You're right there. And at the end of the day, once you've got your first job, that degree sort of just becomes a tick box exercise. Unfortunately, that's the cold hard truth, is that as long as you tick the box of having the degree, obviously the grading will matter, because someone who's got a 2-1 will always get put below someone with a first. So again, put all your effort in now while you're in uni and make those moves, make the right effort there. But once you've got that, you won't be the only person with a first. I managed to come out with a first, and at the end of the day, there's nothing that stops me looking at the next person, because essentially it's just a name. They've got a degree. Here's a bunch of qualifications. Why are you different? You've got to prove that. And Josh, that is exactly what you did by doing all these extra courses. Khaled, you've done the same thing by chasing the internship, so that now when you go to finish university, you're already a leg up. It's not even you're already above your competition in terms of, well, I've been there, done that. Here's the achievements I made at that workplace. It's definitely a longer conversation for another time. But obviously, the introduction of this episode being called "Engineering is Like a Loaf of Bread." Obviously, I will say that all the TikToks will be linked in the bio. That'll be mine, and then obviously our local celebrity Josh. As long as the LinkedIn page, LinkedIn group, all the stuff you'd need to essentially contact any of us for any more questions you've got.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've had a lot of questions. So, a lot of people currently are in the process now of either starting a degree
Mhm.
or starting an apprenticeship, and they're sort of in that sort of phase where they are unsure if it's the right thing. We'll talk about the differences between apprenticeships and degrees in maybe the next episode or one further along the line, because it's a bit of a longer conversation. It's something I'd like to tackle a bit more thoroughly, because I think it's a question a lot of people ask. I've asked the guys to sort of compile some funny engineering stories, because they're something we all like hearing about workplaces. But the one thing I will say, so let's have a look.
I think answering the question that you were mentioning about, how does it feel? So
The long story short, I'd say that there is a stigma with apprenticeships that it isn't as good as a degree. And for some careers, that may be the case, but I can see Josh smiling away there. But the funny thing is that I did a degree apprenticeship, so I actually did the middle ground between Josh and Khaled. And for me, it was the best choice that I made, because there is this stigma that a lot of, I would say, parents and older people have, that apprenticeships, all they are is you go in a grimy workshop and you're going to work with your hands all day and every day. And if that's what you want to do, there are opportunities like that. But the one thing I would say is that you need to look into apprenticeships more thoroughly, because there is so much you can do. A lot of companies run them now. And the issue is that because companies can't find good talent that is interested in these, they are shutting them down. A lot of companies have stopped taking apprentices on now because it usually costs them more than it's worth. So essentially, again, conversation for another episode. There's going to be plenty of these, I think. But generally, the question does come up a lot, being, which one should I choose? And I think, personally, it all comes down to your preference, because you can do whatever you want on whichever route. You've just got to find the right company that suits you, and it's what you want to do. Make sure that is the case, because if it's something your parents want to do or a tutor has suggested to you, you may not enjoy it. You've got to be fully clued up. But we'll sort of leave that there. Well, what we'll do is we'll wrap this up with some engineering stories, if either of you two have got one. One off. Okay, well, we'll let Jim win then.
I'm going to keep my stories that I've experienced so far in my workplace to myself for now.
Yeah, let's not name any names.
Yeah, of course, keeping it anonymous for now. But this one is actually from my dad. My dad had a history in engineering, and he did work in field service for a while. And field service engineers easily have some of the best stories you can encounter. So one night, my dad got rung up. He was on rota, and he got told that a factory somewhere way up or far away from where he lived, middle of the night, something was not working. I believe it was a new fire suppression system that his company had helped install. And he was called out to go and fix it. So he headed over, and the guy who was the manager of the operation and overseeing it being installed, making sure it worked and everything, basically said, right, we are in trouble. The fire suppression system is not working. Without it working, we cannot manufacture anything. So we are losing, millions a day at this rate. And so, yeah, it was not looking good. And they had been trying to figure out for the life of them what had gone wrong, where the issue was. They looked to see if it was electrical. It wasn't. They looked to see what mechanical aspects there were. Still could not find anything. My dad walks up and he says, all right, let's go find the bit that's playing up. And they basically said that it was the fire suppression fluid was, working up to a certain point. This one particular valve, for the life of it, when it would open, it just wouldn't let the fluid through, no matter open or closed. So, not looking good. My dad takes one look up onto the factory floor. And I should have said they were spending their entire time looking at the schematics, right? And that's a crucial part to this. And my dad goes onto the floor of the factory, looks up at the ceiling, and says, "Come here." And the guy comes over, and he points up at the valve from underneath it, and he says, "Do you see that arrow right there?" And he goes, "Yeah." "That means it's a one-way valve, and you've put it in the wrong way round."
Oh dear, it's to be fair, I've encountered that so much. I mean, one of my stories I tell people every time is, you have an apprentice with you and you say, I'm going to put my hand in this panel now, 400 volt panel, and you go, have you turned it off? Yeah, I turned it off. All right, turned it off. Right, okay, so what I'll do is I'll take the main feed out, do all that, undo that. It touches my hand. That is not off. That is not, and I don't know if, so the one thing that if you've never touched it before, you will never understand, but if you have, it's like getting a cattle prod to the back and then all you can taste is metal. And I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but chances are if you've worked in the same industry as me, you will have touched it at some point. Khaled sat there smirking as if he's got something to say, so I'll let you talk.
Nah. I think I'm gonna say one of the experience funny stories I would say is we were on a site visit not too long ago. And it was funny because the site visit was not just engineers and a lot of it was just like a lot of people from finance guys, the Strand Reg guys, HR, you name it. Obviously being, comfortable going to multiple different sites and getting used to the waste treatment sites and self-explanatory, waste treatment sites smell not too pleasant. But when you go quite a lot, you kind of get desensitized to it. Almost like people look at you and think, yeah, you're used to being stinky, but in reality, it's just because if we're being honest, it's just a buildup of ammonia and a bit of other chemicals. When you're having crude sewage coming out in these pipes. So I remember one of the finance guys says, like, why does it stink? Like, I thought we were in a clean water site. And I'm like, mate, the clean water, the final effluent is all the way at the end of the site. Beginning of the crude, you're having a look and you're there like, oh, it stinks. Well, guess what? Womp womp.
You can taste it with your eyes at that point. Like,
It was like they made it such a big deal, and I was just there like, yeah, I'm alright. I had my PPE on, and I was like, yeah, living life, no worries. People would think I'm crazy, but it was just funny to see how our job, as much as you could be, I think engineers as well, as much as you could be, on the desk, you could be on the field like how Josh's dad was.
Yeah.
I think fun, like whatever it is. We are not the typical, oh my God, gonna go grab me a little coffee and going to be the little general type of office guys. We can also be.
Yeah, getting your hands dirty in the end.
Yeah, I get that today, absolutely.
So what I will say is to sort of close this out, I'm going to quickly run through, well, essentially what we've spoken about in terms of barriers to entry, in terms of people getting into engineering. So the first one that we didn't really cover, but I know was sort of in the back of my mind was high academic requirements for a lot of this sort of thing. For someone who maybe struggles with the math side of things, the actual theory, it can be quite a daunting situation, but obviously there is loads of different actual pathways you can use to get into engineering. A degree isn't required in most cases. For jobs where you essentially hold a level of responsibility, or you're doing designs, you're speccing things, a degree more than likely will be required. I've seen situations where people haven't got them, but that was people that have been in the industry before it sort of became the standard. So in terms of other pathways, there's things like foundation years, apprenticeships, and then college to university routes. So like what I did. So I did college, which is slightly different to A levels. It was a bit more practical based and not hands-on based, or sorry, practical based, not exam based, which worked better for me because I never worked well in exam situations. So number 2 was the lack of awareness and guidance of the actual routes that are possible. Obviously, I can happily say that the awareness and guidance is what we're trying to tackle with the Engineering Compass. So obviously, when this goes out, if you've got any questions, if you've watched to this point, to be fair, if you've watched to this point, fair dues. If you've got any more questions, ask away. But expanding your career guidance is quite an easy thing to do. There's a lot of information on the internet, whether that's YouTube, just searching Google, or coming to one of ourselves, or online groups such as myself. And I'm always happy to help. The other thing is try and find someone that is in the career that you want to get to, if that makes sense, whether that's company or role, and try and match with as many people on LinkedIn as you can. Get in contact with them, send them a message and ask them about the industry, because chances are they can talk about it and you can answer all your questions before you actually have any of these questions to start with, really. The other thing is always going to be the lack of work experience. So the common thing that comes up is, how do you get work if you experience, but you can't get experience without work? And as Josh and Khaled have both found out, you have to put in that extra little bit in many cases, or in Josh's case is a lot. That's personal preference. That you can do it. Anyone can do it. It's just you have to put a little bit of effort in to show that you have that passion. You're willing to work hard to get to where you want to be. So in terms of work experience or internships, it's all out there. You've just got to find the right way of approaching it and go and show your face. Sending an email is never going to work, because you get lost in a big pile of it. And unless they're specifically reading their emails looking for people like yourself, you will never get there. If there's a company down the road that you want to get into, go and knock on the door. The worst that's going to happen is they go, oh, well, we don't let civilians or public people in. And then you can say, well, I did come by. In your email, you can say, I came by the other day, and your face has already been known. There's little things like that you can do. It's not a big thing. And then finally, for me, was the confidence barrier. Anyone can do it. Don't get me wrong, there you'll have a bit of self-doubt, misconceptions about what the role can be. But by asking questions before you start applying, you can answer your questions. It's that straightforward. I mean, there's so many different mentorships, programs with aspiring engineers, or, like us, current students or professionals that are happy to answer questions. But build your confidence up through small wins by taking these different courses, by doing those night schools. Tick those things off, and generally your confidence will come with it.